I'm 52 years old, and for most of my life I've been careful, maybe too careful. I married young, raised 2 kids, kept a tidy home, followed the rules. Love, for me, became routine, predictable, safe. I never chased passion, not really. I just maintained things. Smiled when I was supposed to, listened more than I spoke, and told myself that stability was the same thing as happiness. But now I know how wrong I was. I never thought something like this could happen to me. Please, don't make the same mistake I did. It started on a Friday afternoon in early June. The kind of afternoon when the air feels thick with heat and memories. I had just finished watering the garden when my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel, my closest friend since college. **K. Would it be okay if Ethan stayed with you this weekend? My dad's in the hospital, and I need to drive down to Tallahassee. **. I paused for a second, blinking into the sun. Ethan. Her son. 17, almost 18. I remembered him as the shy little boy who used to hide behind her legs when they visited. But lately, he'd grown taller than both of us, his voice deeper, his posture more like a man's than a boy's. Of course I said yes. Rachel had done so much for me over the years. Hosting her son for a couple of days was the least I could do. He arrived a few hours later, dragging a worn duffel bag and giving me a polite, almost bashful smile. "Thanks for letting me stay, Miss Garrett." "Oh, please," I said, waving off the formality. "You're not 12 anymore. Call me Diane." He grinned, and I noticed his smile lingered on my face for just a beat longer than expected. I tried not to read into it. We settled into a comfortable rhythm quickly. I made spaghetti that night, his favorite, apparently, and we watched a movie after dinner. Some action thing I didn't really follow, but he leaned forward the entire time, eyes wide and focused, like he was searching for something in it. We didn't talk much that first evening, not beyond casual things. School, his plans after graduation. He said he wasn't sure yet, maybe trade school, maybe working with his uncle in Colorado. There was a quiet maturity to him that surprised me. He wasn't the aimless, phone-glued teenager I'd expected. Later, I brought him some folded towels and found him sitting on the back deck, staring out into the dark. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, and the air buzzed with cicadas. "You okay?" I asked gently, stepping out beside him. He nodded, but didn't speak right away. Then, sometimes I wish I could just stop time. Just freeze it. You ever feel that way? I looked at him, at the curve of his jaw in the moonlight, the earnestness in his voice. It caught me off guard. "Yeah," I said softly. "More than you'd think." He turned his head and looked at me. I couldn't tell if it was the night air or the quiet of the moment, but something shifted between us. A flicker of unspoken understanding. Then he smiled again, stood up, and said good night. I watched him walk inside and stood alone under the stars for a long while, trying to make sense of the warmth blooming in my chest. It wasn't attraction. At least, that's what I told myself. It was just appreciation, a reminder of youth, of possibility, of being seen. The next day started quietly. I made pancakes, and he helped me clear out some boxes in the garage without being asked. We played music while we worked, Fleetwood Mac, mostly, and he surprised me by knowing the lyrics. He even sang along. "Your taste is better than I expected," I teased. He laughed and said, "That's because my mom raised me right, and she listens to all your old playlists." By early evening, we were both tired and sweaty, so I suggested we cool off in the backyard pool. I hadn't been swimming in ages, but the idea sounded refreshing. I changed into a one-piece that had sat untouched in my drawer for years, suddenly self-conscious about the way it fit. When I stepped outside, he was already in the water, floating lazily, eyes closed. He looked so peaceful, so at ease. I felt something in me soften. "Come on in," he said without opening his eyes. The water was warm from the sun. We splashed around a little, talking about nothing. Then he looked at me and said, "You don't smile much." "Not really." I blinked. "I do." He shook his head. "You pretend to. But when it's real, it lights up your whole face." My breath caught in my throat. I laughed it off, but it stayed with me. The way he said it. The way he saw me. Not as someone's mom friend. Not as a middle-aged woman with a predictable life, but as a person. As a woman. That night after dinner, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice. His laughter. I kept feeling the way his eyes held mine just a little too long. And I started to realize maybe something was waking up in me that I hadn't felt in years. Something that both scared and thrilled me. But I didn't know then how far it would go or how much it would change me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't quite made it over the trees, and the house was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring out the window at the soft light spreading across the lawn. I kept telling myself I was just tired, that all the strange feelings from the night before were just passing nonsense stirred up by the novelty of having a guest. But when I heard his footsteps on the stairs, bare feet on the hardwood floor, slow and heavy, I felt something flutter in my chest. It was ridiculous. I was 52. He was barely out of high school. I had no business feeling the way I felt. Still, when he came into the kitchen with messy hair and sleepy eyes, something about the sight made me smile before I could stop it. "Morning," he said, rubbing his neck. "You're up early." "Habit," I replied. "Want some eggs?" He nodded, and we fell into a quiet rhythm. Me cooking, him sitting nearby, watching me in that way that made me nervous and curious all at once. There was something about the stillness of the moment, the ordinary clatter of the spatula against the pan, the way sunlight caught the gold in his hair. When I handed him his plate, his fingers brushed mine, just briefly, but enough to send a jolt through me. I tried not to react. "You always seem so calm," he said as we ate. I laughed lightly. "Is that your way of saying I'm boring?" "No," he said quickly. "Not at all. I just mean, it's nice. You make the house feel safe." It was such an honest, quiet compliment, and it undid me a little. I'd spent so many years being the one who held everything together, who smiled through disappointments, who tucked away parts of herself so no one would be uncomfortable. Hearing someone say I made things feel safe, it felt like being seen. After breakfast, we didn't make any plans. He went outside to read on the porch, and I did some laundry, trying to ignore the way my thoughts kept drifting. But by late afternoon, the sky had shifted, gray clouds rolling in from the west, thunder low in the distance. Summer storms in Florida never announced themselves loudly until they were right on top of you. We ended up in the living room together, the rain tapping on the windows, the lights dim. I lit a few candles just in case the power flickered out, and we sat on opposite ends of the couch, flipping through an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. "That's my daughter when she was little," I said, pointing to a picture of a little girl in muddy boots holding a frog. "She looks like you," he said. "Same eyes." "She's stronger than I ever was," I murmured, more to myself than him. He turned to look at me. "You don't give yourself enough credit." I was suddenly aware of how close he was. The couch didn't feel as big anymore. There was a warmth radiating between us, quiet but undeniable. "You remind me of someone I used to know," I said softly, not sure why I said it. "Is that a good thing?" he asked. I nodded, eyes locked on his. "Yes, but also, it scares me." The silence stretched. The thunder outside rolled louder. He reached out and touched my hand, just a simple gesture, fingers resting lightly on mine. "You don't have to be afraid with me." My breath hitched. It would have been easy to pull away, to change the subject, to stand up and go do something safe like clean the kitchen or call Rachel. But I didn't. I just sat there, letting the moment settle between us, letting the warmth in his hand spread up my arm like a quiet invitation. Eventually, I did pull away, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I stood and walked to the kitchen under the excuse of making tea. My heart was racing. My thoughts were scattered. I told myself this had to stop, that nothing could happen, that it was just a lonely woman and a kind young man crossing emotional wires in a strange weekend. But I could still feel the impression of his touch. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed with the rain still falling outside, trying to convince myself that the lines hadn't shifted, that nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew they had. And I wasn't sure what that meant, or what would happen next. The rain was gone by morning, but the air still carried that damp, earthy smell. I stood barefoot on the porch with my coffee, watching the mist lift from the yard. Everything felt a little too quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. Ethan hadn't come downstairs yet, and I wasn't sure whether I was relieved or disappointed. The memory of his hand on mine still lingered. I'd replayed it 100 times during the night, each time telling myself it meant nothing, until it started to mean something I couldn't ignore. I heard his footsteps again, so familiar now, like part of the house. He joined me on the porch, stretching, his t-shirt wrinkled and damp at the collar. He looked older than he had a few days ago, or maybe I was just seeing him differently. "Morning," he said softly. "Hey." We stood in silence for a while. The birds had come back after the storm, chirping in the trees like nothing had happened. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated. "I'm not sure." He nodded slowly, as if he understood something I hadn't said out loud. "Yesterday, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he added after a moment. "You didn't," I said too quickly, then added, "I mean, not exactly." He looked at me, waiting. I sighed, gripping the mug tighter. "I think I forgot what it feels like to be noticed, really noticed, and I wasn't expecting it from you." "I wasn't expecting to feel it either," he said quietly. "What I do." It would have been easier if he'd laughed it off, if he'd said he was just being kind or awkward or young. But he didn't. He stood there, honest and open, and it was the sincerity that unraveled me most. We spent the rest of the morning doing ordinary things, grocery shopping, folding laundry, but something had changed between us. There was a tension now, soft but constant, like a thread pulling us closer with every glance, every accidental brush of the hand. That afternoon, we sat in the living room again, this time watching a quiet indie film he'd picked. It was slow and beautiful, full of silences and small gestures. Somewhere in the middle of it, he reached out and put his hand over mine again. And I didn't move away. We didn't speak. We just stayed like that, hands touching, the movie flickering across our faces. I could feel the pulse in his fingers, steady, warm, young. My own hand trembled slightly, but I didn't pull it back. When the credits rolled, he turned toward me, his eyes searching mine. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. I nodded. "You're the first person in a long time who's really listened to me, who hasn't made me feel like I'm just some dumb kid." I swallowed hard. "You're not a dumb kid." "I know," he said, "but you're the only one who sees that." There was something achingly tender in his voice, something that pulled at parts of me I hadn't touched in years. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead, an impulse I didn't even register until my fingers were already there. He leaned forward, just slightly, enough that I felt the heat of his breath, enough that I had to close my eyes for a second. But then I stood, quickly. I need to start dinner," I said, my voice shaking. He didn't stop me. He just sat there, watching me walk away. In the kitchen, I gripped the counter, heart pounding. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was leaving tomorrow. Rachel would be back. Life would return to its normal, predictable rhythm. And yet something inside me felt shifted, like a window had opened that couldn't be closed again. That night, after dinner, he offered to do the dishes. I stood beside him, drying as he washed, our movements slow, deliberate. When we finished, he turned to me. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For this. For being you." I didn't know what to say, so I reached up and touched his cheek, just once, just lightly. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about age or rules or even attraction. It was about being seen, being wanted, being understood in a way I hadn't been in decades. It was terrifying. And it was beautiful. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat alone in the living room after Ethan had gone upstairs, the lights turned low, the house humming with the kind of stillness that only comes in the very early hours. I curled my legs beneath me on the couch, clutching a throw blanket and staring at nothing. My thoughts swirled like slow-moving water, too heavy to fight but impossible to ignore. I kept thinking about everything that had happened over the past few days, the quiet moments, the shared glances, the words that hung in the air long after they were spoken. I hadn't expected any of it, and I sure hadn't expected it to feel so honest. I'd been living quietly for years. My divorce was amicable but hollow. The kids had grown up and moved on, and I'd built a routine that was safe, structured. I'd even convinced myself that was enough. Until now. It was just after 2 a.m. when I heard footsteps coming downstairs. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. He paused at the entry to the room. I could feel his presence, soft, hesitant. "I couldn't sleep," he said quietly. Neither could I. He sat down beside me, careful not to get too close. His voice was low. "I'm leaving tomorrow." "I know." There was a long pause. "I don't want this to be something we pretend didn't happen," he said finally. I turned to him. "We haven't done anything." "We have," he said, eyes meeting mine. "Even if we haven't touched. You feel it too, don't you?" I looked away, but that didn't mean he was wrong. "I do," I whispered. "But that doesn't mean we should." "I'm not asking for forever," he said. I don't want to feel like I was the only one who felt something." "You weren't." Silence again. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the trees. A branch scraped gently across the window like a reminder that time was still passing. He reached out, and this time I didn't hesitate. I let his hand find mine. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't about crossing lines. It was about connection, about being human, about two people who, for different reasons, felt alone in the world and happened to find comfort in each other's company. We sat like that for a while. No words, no expectations, just presence. Eventually, I leaned my head against his shoulder. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what came next. But I knew I would remember that feeling for a long time. The next morning, the air was cooler, brighter. We said goodbye without dramatics. He hugged me tightly, longer than necessary, and I held on just as long. "Thank you," he said again. "For what?" I asked. "For seeing me." As I watched him walk down the driveway to where his mother's car was waiting, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and peace. Rachel waved at me from the driver's seat, completely unaware of what had passed between us. And that was okay. I went back inside, the house suddenly quieter than before. Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting on the back deck with a cup of tea, the sun warm on my face. I let the silence wash over me. Maybe nothing would come of it. Maybe it was just a moment, a weekend, a gentle spark in an otherwise quiet chapter of my life. But maybe, just maybe, it was something more than that. I had spent so many years believing that love only looked one way, that once a certain kind of time had passed, your heart stopped surprising you. But now I knew better. We don't always get to choose when we wake up, or who wakes us. And sometimes the most unexpected moments are the ones that remind us we're still alive, still capable of feeling, still worthy of being seen.